Caleb Williams lit up his pro day at USC. But what was more important was how the Chicago Bears responded, as they look more than ready to take him with the number 1 overall pick.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on all of your favorite social media platforms, including the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. On the show today, we look at Caleb Williams' pro day performance, less in the weeds on the specific throws or anything that he made, but more the fallout from the pro day. The Bears looking very clearly engaged and ready to draft him with the number 1 overall pick, and Caleb already talking like he's a member of the Chicago Bears. We'll also touch on Jaylen Johnson's comments about Caleb Williams and what Caleb will be coming into locker room-wise in Chicago, and how a little bit of a warning, a little bit of a setting the record straight for Caleb as he prepares to come to Chicago. And hey, this is what you got to expect when you're coming into our locker room. And then we'll look at what the Bears still could do at the quarterback position, whether they're set now with Caleb, Tyson Bagent, and Brett Ripien, or whether another quarterback to that room could be valuable for the young guys already under contract. But everybody was out at Caleb Williams' pro day. A ton of media, ton of attention. NFL Network, I guess NFL Plus, through their digital app, but the NFL Network ended up airing it later on in the day. And also, seemingly everyone in the Chicago Bears, like front office and coaching staff. We're talking Ryan Poles, Ian Cunningham, Matt Eberflus, Kerry Joseph, the quarterback's coach, Thomas Brown, the passing game coordinator. I think Shane Waldron was there. Actually, off the top of my head, I can't remember if I remember seeing his name and his face in that contingent as well. But there were like 8 or 10 different Bears scouts, coaches, evaluators on hand for this pro day. And that's more than they send to any other pro day. They'll send big groups to pro days before. Eberflus and Poles have gone together to pro days before. And it's a big deal when you send your general manager and your head coach, along with the area scout or whatever, the regional scout, to that pro day. But not often do you see the Chicago Bears send GM, assistant GM, head coach, offensive coordinator, passing game coordinator, quarterback coach, area scout, regional scout, assistant director of scouting. I mean, all of these different people, all to see Caleb Williams throw. Sure, it's partially influenced by Williams not participating at the combine, and most, or if not all of those people would have been at the combine to see him there anyway, but he's not the only player that didn't perform at the combine that the Bears have gone out and to watch and haven't sent this large of a contingency toward. They saw a really strong day from Caleb Williams, but, he's throwing against air. There's no defense. He's throwing to his teammates on routes and plays that they scripted and prepared for ahead of time. So, yeah, Caleb Williams had a strong pro day. Most quarterbacks have good pro days. It's designed for them to look good. So I'm not going to come here on the podcast to say and go, man, when you watch that pro day, that's how you know Caleb Williams is going to be a great quarterback. That's how you know he should be the number 1 overall pick. It's like, I'm sure at Oregon, Bo Nix has a good pro day. I'm sure at North Carolina's pro day, Drake May will throw well. And I'm sure at LSU's pro day, Jaden Daniels will throw well. And they'll all look like great quarterbacks because it's designed to be that way. Like what Caleb Williams did throwing at the pro day doesn't really change anything directly. But the whole broader pro day event and timing is what really solidifies things for the Chicago Bears. Caleb Williams had said throughout this process he wasn't going to meet with teams individually until after his pro day. but he made an exception this week for the Chicago Bears. The pro day was Wednesday. He met with the Chicago Bears and had dinner in the days leading up to the pro day, really kind of getting to know them, trying to build that relationship and kind of build that two-way confidence. He can be confident in them, in what they plan for him and what they want to do for the direction of the franchise. And they can be confident in him as the quarterback that they want to bring in. And it feels like every time we take another step in this process, all it is connecting the dots even further to go from 90% sure they're going to draft Caleb Williams to 95% sure they're going to draft Caleb Williams to 99.9. And I think they just need to bring him in for a private workout, which some have said could be as soon as this weekend, to really get to like 100% all boxes are checked, crossing T's and dotting our I's. But when you hear Caleb Williams talk, you already hear him, maybe Freudian slip, kind of talk about himself as a future, almost current Chicago Bear, because one of the names that was at the pro day that I didn't mention is new Chicago Bears wide receiver Keenan Allen, recently traded from the Chargers. I'm not a California person, but I don't think LA and USC, I think USC is in San Diego. I don't know exactly how far that is, but it's close enough that Keenan Allen can go over and hop over. Apparently they've had a previous relationship, and Caleb Williams was asked about Keenan Allen being there during an interview he did after the pro day on NFL Plus with Steve Weish. And there's a particular line in the quote that kind of gave it away. And again, was it intentional? Probably not. Was it more of a Freudian slip? Yeah. I mean, he hasn't come out and said, I believe the Bears drafted me. He says, I'm going to wait out the process and see what happens. But in this quote, when asked about Keenan Allen being at practice, he said, quote, I've known Keenan for a little bit now. We've hung out. He was at the Chargers. Now he's at the Bears. He's here for a 4th-round pick, which is crazy. He's a beast, a good guy, and he can give you a lot of knowledge. So Caleb refers to the Chicago Bears getting Keenan Allen as here as in like where he is, not literally in USC, but like he's here on my team for a 4th-round pick, like almost saying like we got him for a 4th-round pick. He's here, implying that Keenan Allen is in the same place as Caleb Williams for a 4th-round pick, not just physically in the same location, but also then on the same team. So again, I don't think that was Caleb intentionally trying to do that, but I think it just kind of came out that way of him in the back of his mind, maybe subconsciously talking about himself as a Chicago Bear, as someone who's going to get to throw to Keenan Allen and be coached by Matt Eberflus and, general managed by Ryan Poles. Like everything is all but locked in on that front. And there's even been some reporting that maybe the Bears got Caleb Williams' medical records early. It's part of why they pushed back their visit with him that was originally scheduled right after the combine and pushed it back to the future. I think because they got enough of the medicals. It might not be all of the medicals, but they got a certain amount of the medicals to be sure enough to say, all right, like we still want to get the rest of them to be sure, but we're comfortable with where things stand medically right now, so they can move forward with trading Justin Fields and all these things and move forward to Caleb Williams being your Chicago Bears quarterback. I think the Bears locker room is starting to brace for this real reality. I mean, it started when Justin Fields got traded, but specifically it being Caleb Williams as opposed to some other rookie coming in here. So we'll hear what Jaylen Johnson said about the ways Caleb Williams is going to need to adjust himself to fit in this Bears locker room next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. Get ready to say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament, no matter how your bracket's doing. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a number 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's number 1 sportsbook. Now is a great time to get in on the action because new customers will get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So you bet $5 on even a number 1 seed to beat a number 16 seed, a huge favorite, doesn't matter. You'll win the winnings for your $5 bet, and then they will also add an extra $200 into your account that you can use on point spreads, money line. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Or you can bet on this upcoming NFL draft. You can bet on whether Justin Fields is going to start for the Steelers this season. A lot of football bets still available on FanDuel. So to claim your $200 in bonus bets, just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops till they cut down the nets. Caleb Williams will come into a Chicago Bears locker room to try and fill a big void left by Justin Fields, at least from a locker room presence and leadership standpoint. There was plenty of record of Justin Fields being beloved, of players coming out in support of him and not necessarily loving the idea of trading him, although there seemed to be a pretty communal understanding that this is part of the business and that if this is what the front office thinks is what's best for the team's long-term success, then players are okay with it. But that doesn't mean it's just like jump in and, hey, all right, you're our new leader, kid. I mean, a 21, 22-year-old kid, it's hard to come into a locker room full of professionals making, collectively hundreds of millions of dollars, but individually tens of millions of dollars across the board and say, all right, like, I'm the new sheriff in town. I've also never done this before at the NFL level. I've never been in an NFL team before. I've never been in an NFL locker room before at this capacity. Like, there's an adjustment period there for Caleb Williams. And I think Jaylen Johnson, as one of the leaders of this defense and the highest paid player on the team at this point, I think his new contract, he's not the highest in terms of the cap hit, but I think in terms of the total guaranteed money on his contract. So however you want to define highest paid player, I guess. But I think technically the overall value of Montez Sweat's contract is higher, but Jaylen Johnson gets more guaranteed money. But anyway, one of the highest paid players in this defense is certainly one of the longest tenured Bears and a leader on this team. Like, he's trying to both like set up Caleb Williams for success and also like warn him and prevent him from failing. And he did an interview with Kay Adams on her show that I think it's called Up and Adams on YouTube and FanDuel or whatever it is. And he gave an interesting quote. Like, he's not coming out saying, like, yes, we expect Caleb Williams to be here. But he was talking about, hey, like, if it's Caleb Williams or if a rookie quarterback gets in here, like, what can he expect from this Chicago Bears locker room and how does he adjust to the NFL? And Jaylen Johnson was pretty candid about it. He said, you have to humble yourself coming into the building. Quote, you just can't bring that Hollywood stuff into the building, especially with guys who have played the game at a high level for consecutive years. And he went on and mentioned, like, Tremaine Edmonds and DJ Moore and all this stuff. But anyway, to continue the quote, we're going to see through that. What you did in college, the Hollywood, it's like, nah, you got to prove yourself. That stuff like that doesn't matter. But you got to get to know him too. I think there's a fine line between trying to prove a point to him, but you also got to get to know him. Because at the end of the day, we want him to be the absolute best he can be. And so it sounds at first a little bit like a threat, like, hey, don't bring that Hollywood stuff in here, kid. Like, we're not here to take all that, whatever. I don't even know exactly what he means by that Hollywood stuff. Like, I don't know what of the things Caleb Williams does that I would associate with Hollywood. I mean, it's just that he's, one of the most exciting quarterbacks in college football, and he's the big man on campus, the Heisman Trophy winner. Like, I think it's more like an ego thing that Jaylen Johnson is warning against. Not that he sees Caleb Williams having an ego or an ego that's going to be a problem, but just saying, like, hey, man, like the first words of that quote, you got to humble yourself when you come in here. Like, don't come in here thinking you're just going to be the king of the locker room right away. You got to tone that down a little bit. Like, you got to be the king in LA and king in Hollywood and all that stuff, and that's great. That's a big part of why the Bears like that. I mean, you want that in your quarterback to build up to be that, that true, like, alpha of the locker room. But you got to humble yourself coming in this locker room, and don't try and come in here and be the flashy, exciting young hotshot who's going to tell everybody what's what and how things are going to be done here nowadays. Like, no, you got to fit in, you got to earn your stripes, and you got to build your way up. It starts as that kind of threat. It kind of feels like a strong word there, but it starts as that kind of like warning. But then Jaylen Johnson reminds us, like, by the end there, that it's kind of the bigger point here. Like, yeah, like, it doesn't matter as, like, the goal is to win football games. And as much as the players loved Justin Fields, and as much as there might be some sore feelings about Justin Fields not being there, and maybe in their heads comparing Justin to Caleb early on and saying, like, well, Justin would have done this or Caleb's not doing that. Like, all that matters to all of these players more than anything else is how good the quarterback is, and more, I guess, within that, winning football games. And winning football games is directly tied to how good the quarterback is. So if Caleb Williams comes in and is great instantly, he's not going to have any problems winning over the locker room and getting respect from those guys and being able to build those relationships and absolutely leading this team. Like, that won't be a problem. Success is what builds those connections faster and stronger than anything else. Winning cures all ails, at least temporarily until you stop winning. But, like, that's all that's going to matter to them first and foremost. And as much as they want to make sure he comes in humble and doesn't try to do too much, it is also about winning. So it's balancing that message of hey, you got to kind of fit in with us here, but also we want to help you be successful too. We're on this literally on the same team here, not just metaphorically on the same team here, literally on the same team here. So it's not going to be a Caleb versus the locker room type situation because they do all have the same goal. Now, could that transition be more difficult if there are early struggles? I mean, perhaps, but you're not really going to see early struggles that have an impact until September, right? The early struggles only count when there's wins and losses. So you've got rookie minicamp, OTAs, training camp, the preseason, for those relationships to really, really build and strengthen before the games matter. And you start to, if he struggles his first couple of weeks of the regular season, he will have had 6 months or 5 months or whatever the math is on the calendar math there to have all these people kind of know him and start to trust him so that even if things start to struggle a little bit here and there, they will have built up enough of that rapport, enough of that trust that, all right, we can get through this and not feel like, man, this guy is holding us back or having problems like that. That's all the biggest part of this equation. And that's why it's a big part of why the Bears had to trade Justin Fields even for a 6th-round pick, because you couldn't have that tension of anytime the rookie makes a mistake or isn't what they wanted to be or whatever for any moment, well, we've got Justin here. We all like Justin. You can't have that constant back and forth lingering over Caleb Williams or lingering there for Justin Fields. It wasn't going to be super sustainable there. So to me, all the things Jaylen Johnson said is normal locker room stuff that he said out loud that you don't always get to hear directly, but it's nothing to really make a big fuss out of. We haven't seen Caleb Williams have any reported locker room teammate issues. Everybody at USC raves about Caleb Williams. All his coaches, all his teammates have nothing but great things to say about him. And you might say, well, of course, they always will only have nothing but great things to say. But usually throughout the draft process, something bad comes out, even if it's minor, something leaks, especially when it's a top prospect. 31 other teams would love to see Caleb Williams fall out of the number 1 spot. So 31 other teams have an incentive, if they have something they could leak about Caleb Williams that's bad, to try and lower his draft stock. 31 other teams have this incentive to try and make Caleb Williams fall by leaking negative information about him. And yet we're 3/4 of the way through March. We still got about a month until draft day or a little more, whatever again, I don't know the exact date math on that, but 30 some odd days until draft day. There's still time for something to come out, but it hasn't yet. And it feels like maybe it would have by now if it was going to be something huge. I mean, we'll see how it goes. But if I was a team trying to get Caleb Williams to fall, I would have wanted that information to come out earlier and earlier before the Bears fall all the way in love with him and aren't as worried about if a little thing comes out here or there. All we hear is really constant praise of Caleb Williams. And I think it bodes well for his ability to mesh in this Bears locker room. And I really think, despite the reaction to what Jaylen Johnson said, I think some people were quick to be whoa, Jaylen Johnson calling out Caleb Williams? No, not a big deal. Just him setting the stage for everybody. Yeah, this is how it works, but it's not anything exceptional or unique to the Bears or Caleb Williams or this situation. Young players got to come in and humble themselves and learn and catch up to the rest of the veterans in the NFL. That's just regular yearly business for all 32 locker rooms. I do think Caleb Williams would benefit from having a more established veteran presence in the quarterback room that they don't have right now. There are still some free agent quarterbacks available the Bears could look at, but it becomes a little bit complicated if you still want Tyson Bagent to really be your number 2 guy. They did sign Brett Ripien, so I don't know. We'll look at what the Bears could still do at quarterback and whether they actually will next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at BetterHelp. BetterHelp is a great way to get online therapy to help you be your best self. I am a huge advocate for therapy. It's a really important part of my own personal mental health regimen, and I cannot recommend it enough for you. I like to describe it kind of like going to the gym, but for my brain. I don't go to the gym because my body's broken, but I go to the gym because I want my body to be as healthy and as strong as it can be. And I think of therapy the same way, not because my brain is broken, but because I want my mental health to be as healthy and as strong as it can be. So if you've been thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited right to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire, and then they'll match you with a licensed therapist. And if that first one's not the right fit for you, that's okay. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. The Chicago Bears signed Brett Ripien to be their number 3 quarterback in the Nathan Peterman role, but that doesn't feel like enough for me with Caleb Williams, right? Brett Ripien feels like a training camp body at quarterback, but he feels to me more like a number 4 quarterback who competes to be the number 3 or maybe even the number 2, but not a guy who realistically will make your 53-man roster. Like, he's worth, I guess, taking a flyer on as a guy who, had been on the Seattle Seahawks briefly last season, I think on the practice squad. He was elevated to their active roster for a couple of weeks last season, or maybe just one or two, and then signed off to the Jets. So, like, he had briefly spent some time with Shane Waldron, so he does have some experience in this offense, and also the Los Angeles Rams under Sean McVay. So, like, there's a connection enough there that I'm like, okay, I like having a quarterback who's played for this team or played for this offense before, even if it's really brief. But a 27-year-old Brett Ripien doesn't necessarily, to me, say, like, occupy the role of veteran backup quarterback who can take Caleb Williams under his wing and just kind of like not show him the ropes, because you're not going to sign a backup quarterback that's going to be better than Caleb Williams, right? It's not showing him how to play quarterback, but show him how to be a professional football player, how to handle your meeting schedule, how to handle nutrition, how to handle timing, how to handle all this stuff. Like certainly Caleb Williams has had to do a lot of that stuff at USC, and he's basically been like a professional quarterback at USC. But now it's a different place, it's a different city, it's a different organization, it's a different level of football. Like, yes, major college programs like USC operate like professional football teams, but not exactly like professional football teams. It's close, but it's something different when you're not on a college campus. You don't have classes, although, let's be honest, I don't know how rigorous Caleb Williams' classes are, but you go from football player and student to just full-time football player. And that's more time to manage. And again, these are all things that Caleb Williams can figure out on his own and doesn't, quote unquote, he'll be okay if he doesn't have the veteran quarterback there. But you could also see it helping by having a guy who's been through years and years of the NFL, guy who's started games in the professional football league, guy who has seen a lot of defenses, seen a lot of different coaches, seen a lot of different quarterbacks, coaches, been in a lot of different locker rooms, and can just have perspective on how things operate in the NFL that Caleb Williams just won't, because he doesn't have that actual experience. Just things that you can only learn from having done it, and done it enough to have a variety of perspective there and know what you're talking about. And with all due respect to Brett Ripien, and he's been in the NFL for 3 or 4 seasons, and he has played 10 games. I guess he's technically started 4 games in his NFL career across 4 different years. But I don't know that 168 pass attempts in the NFL, 4 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. I'm not sure that that's enough of the veteran experience to be like, yeah, Brett Ripien is going to show Caleb Williams how to be a professional quarterback, especially because Brett Ripien will not be here come week 1. I mean, never say never. I guess he could be on the practice squad, but he's not a guy who's been able to consistently stick on any team in the NFL. Now, Tyson Bagent has also started professional football games and has looked decent in professional football games, but he's only ever been in the Chicago Bears locker room. He's only ever played for Matt Eberflus. He's only started 3 or 4 games. He's 1 season older than Caleb Williams. There are things he can help Caleb Williams with and can provide some experience for hey, this is what it was like for me as a rookie last season. But I would rather have that veteran quarterback who's just, he doesn't have to be that old, but has just been around the block a little bit more than the guys that the Bears have under contract right now. We've seen the backup quarterback market dry up a little bit, or really kind of finish up the last couple of days. We just saw Josh Dobbs get signed and a couple other guys that had been free agents throughout this process, but there's still a handful of names to keep an eye on. And I'm going to go through some names, and not all of them are super realistic, but when you look at if we just take big picture, who's still unsigned, you got Ryan Tannehill from the Titans, Carson Wentz who spent last season with the Rams when it was all said and done, Trevor Siemian, the Jets, Blaine Gabbert, Kansas City Chiefs, Brian Hoyer from the Raiders, who's been a Chicago Bears quarterback before, and also, I guess, P.J. Walker, who the Bears signed last offseason and cut and lost to Tyson Bagent. He's also available again. I don't think the Bears are going to re-sign P.J. Walker and try and do that a second time. I think there was maybe some sore feelings or hard feelings that came with that one. And on the same boat, Ryan Tannehill is not going to come to the Chicago Bears to be a number 3 quarterback, or realistically at that point, number 2, but to be the mentor to Caleb Williams. I think he's looking for a spot where maybe he can have more of a shot to start and regenerate his career a little bit more. So it's not like any of these quarterbacks jump out at you as wow, that's the perfect veteran who's left that the Bears can sign that's really gonna mentor or be the perfect mentor for Caleb Williams. Okay, Carson Wentz has been around the block. He's done playoff games before and has played in a bunch of different offenses. Sure. Again, I think Carson Wentz is kind of in the Joe Flacco area where he's either ring chasing or looking for a spot where he could fill in and start in a pinch. And I don't know that Carson Wentz is super exciting for me as a quarterback, but none of these names are super exciting as a quarterback. But I think you could convince any of these guys that hey, we liked what Tyson Bagent did last season, but he's not guaranteed anything. If you signed if you signed Ryan Tannehill, which again, I don't think they're going to do that, but if you signed Ryan Tannehill, you could put Tyson Bagent on the practice squad. I think you could get away with it. I really think you could. I don't think Tyson Bagent is 100% locked into a 53-man roster spot. I mean, most likely he'll be the number 2 quarterback this season, no question. That move forward, you want Tyson Bagent around, you want to keep developing him, and I think he gives you the best chance to win as a backup quarterback over any of those other options. So realistically, you keep 3 quarterbacks, but Tyson Bagent doesn't have to be your number 2 quarterback. It's not an insult to Tyson Bagent as you make him the number 3 and keep developing him. He played well. He's also an undrafted free agent. Those guys aren't guaranteed anything. They aren't owed anything, and you got to do what's best for your football team, which I think would be having a veteran quarterback in there to help mentor Caleb Williams. Keep Tyson Bagent as well, by all means, but you might have to make Ryan Tannehill QB2 and let Tyson Bagent be QB3 for a little while, and that's tough luck. But let me get that veteran for Caleb. Caleb's development is more important than Tyson Bagent's development. I want to develop Tyson Bagent, but Caleb is more important. So would having Tannehill or Hoyer or Gabbert or Carson Wentz or any of those guys as a number 2 quarterback, if that would help Caleb Williams, that's number 1 priority for me. It would be ideal to get someone who has more experience specifically in this offense, has worked with Shane Waldron, has worked with Sean McVay. There's not really that perfect backup quarterback that's still out there. John Wolford from the Buccaneers would have been a nice fit there, but he re-signed. There's other names of guys just aren't as experienced, but have dabbled. It's kind of different versions of Brett Rypien. Jacob Eason from the Giants spent some time with the Seahawks a couple of years ago, and I think with the Rams before that. He knows the offense, but he doesn't have the starts and the NFL in-game experience that I'm kind of looking for here. So there's not a right mix of a veteran who's really been around the block who also knows Shane Waldron's offense, but that would be the ideal backup here that just doesn't quite exist. So maybe you just roll with Caleb and Tyson Bagent, and you let your quarterbacks coach, Kerry Joseph, be that guy. I mean, he's a former CFL quarterback. He's played quarterback himself, at a professional level, and was dabbled in the NFL as well. It's not like he doesn't know what's going on. At the end of the day, that's what the coaching staff is for. And I think, again, Caleb Williams would be fine if you didn't have a veteran backup quarterback, but I wouldn't mind seeing one if the right fit was out there. We'll see what Ryan Poles decides to do. Ultimately, at this point, I think it's probably going to be Williams, Bagent, Brett Rypien, 1, 2, 3, but if they do sign a quarterback, you can be sure we'll break it down for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for your second listen, we just launched our Locked On Podcast Network's Major League Baseball season preview. It streamed last night live on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, but you can still go check it out and get all of your baseball season coverage with all of our local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering all of your favorite baseball teams, whether you're a North Sider or a South Sider or some other team in Major League Baseball. We've got you covered there. So check out the MLB season preview from the Locked On Sports Today channel or your favorite Locked On Baseball podcast, because they already started doing a regular season game in Korea, and actual opening day is right around the corner. So get excited for baseball season. Coming back to Locked On Bears, as we're going to talk to Louis DiBiase from Locked On Eagles about DeAndre Swift on tomorrow's podcast. We're going to get deeper into this NFL draft coverage in the next month as well. Make sure that you're ready for draft day. And then, of course, you know that no matter what we're talking about in the meat of the podcast, we're always going to make sure you get an opportunity to bear down.